hours that he spends on the telephone, talking with administrators, talking with athletic directors, talking with coaches. I can't imagine how much time he puts in. Brett, what's going on, buddy? Good to have you back on the program.
Hey, Lawton, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm good, dude. I was just telling everybody, like, what's the timeline on like, if you had to guess? Well, I guess you don't have to guess. You probably make most of these calls on your cell phone. You could probably pull the data from Verizon or AT&T or whoever. But any idea how many hours you put in, on the phone talking with coaches and assistant coaches and administrators to put together Pick Six Previews preseason magazine?
Yeah, it's a ton of time. I mean, when you factor in head coaches, coordinators, position coaches, some ADs in there, and then a lot of radio, a ton of radio hits, podcasts, not just recordings, but also talking to these beat writers, talking to, radio hosts to get some insight and not inside information, but just knowledge about what's going on, on the ground. So I'd say a couple hundred hours at least. I mean, the whole book overall is a 7-month process every year from the moment the confetti falls on the national title stage all the way till mid-July. It's, almost half a year each year putting this book together.
Brett, I want to ask you, look, I understand the guys at ESPN, they got to make their conversations. Guys on the radio like me got to react to it and talk about it, and fans got to be upset about it. That's just the way this whole thing goes. But yesterday, David Pollack, Joey Galloway both insinuated they thought Georgia was going to beat Clemson, and I had to talk today to the Tigers about all of that. So give us just some of your thoughts on the most intriguing aspects of this matchup. Look, I don't disagree. It's going to be a top 5 game. Anybody can win at neutral site. But what are some of your thoughts, as we kind of look ahead 1 month from today when the Bulldogs and the Tigers kick it off in Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a season-defining game. When you look back on how the 2021 season and playoff picture will come to be, this game is as important as any. It'll be a top 5 matchup. The first top 5 matchup we've seen in opening week, I think since 2017 or 16, when it was Alabama versus Florida State, a top 4 matchup. But this one I think will be even more exciting and explosive in terms of offense. So positionally, yeah, I think the key position group battle is going to be Clemson's offensive line against Georgia's front 7, because in 2020, Clemson's offensive line took a slight step back. Of course, the first few years there, the last few years, it's been number 1 in yards per carry with Travis Etienne and that run push. And in 2020, they stepped back to 70th nationally. So middle of the pack and run push. So, and then not to mention that they're going to be blocking for a new quarterback. I know that DJU played, he started 2 games last year, but still a first marquee start here in 2021. Going against Georgia front 7, that's absolutely loaded with talent and all conference guys. Jordan Davis turned down the pros right there in the middle. Nakobe Dean at linebacker, and just plenty of guys off the edge causing havoc in the pass rush game. So that's the exact position group I like. That'll really define the game.
What kind of impact do you expect, and what have you heard about Eric Gilbert, the transfer from LSU at tight end, who's obviously one of the more talented tight ends we've seen coming out of high school in a while now, getting an opportunity with the Bulldogs? I mean, do you expect that we see his name called a good bit by the PA announcer there in Charlotte in the season opener?
Yeah, I think we'll see him. And on a higher level, this is key. A key development in the new 2020, 2021 college football landscape is this transfer portal. And it's the ability for these top-notch programs to patch up any kind of, roster holes or some aspects that are thin in the blink of an eye. And Georgia really owned that this cycle by bringing in Gilbert, a 5-star pass catcher there at tight end. But then also in their secondary, where they were a little thin with some NFL draft picks taken, and they added an All-American Tyke Smith from West Virginia. And obviously, you guys know Darian Kendrick hopped over to Georgia. So they plugged up a couple holes there, relatively. I know that they're still loaded with talent, but it's something that I'd like to see Clemson start to embrace a bit, because I know that Dabo has historically, no transfers in. But I think just to stay modern with the game and the times, as much as we either like it or don't like it, you got to just stay modern with this stuff. So, look for Gilbert. They have a ton of guys on the outsides, and it's a vertical passing attack now. It's not your old Georgia from the 1980s or from even, 2018. This is a completely revamped offense, and we're going to see it.
One of the other things that I've talked about here with the listeners today a little bit, because they kind of brought up, what has JT Daniels done? Like that was the big defense about the projections from Galloway and Pollock. And in fairness, he hadn't been at Georgia all that long, just 4 games under his belt. But it's kind of unique, man, when we look around the country this year. I mean, Ohio State's going to be breaking in a new quarterback. Clemson breaking in essentially a new quarterback. Alabama breaking in a new quarterback. I mean, the youth movement at some of the top programs in the country could really define this 2021 campaign if you kind of look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, certainly. And with quarterback being the headliner position and arguably the most important for a playoff run, that's why, these superpower programs are a little bit up for grabs, a little bit unknown, more than usual. Alabama with a 5-star Bryce Young, Ohio State now with 3 5-stars to pick from and a 4-star. So a really crowded room there, but still talent abounds. And I'm sure that that's a great problem to have for Ryan Day. And then Clemson, obviously another 5-star arm with DJU. We saw him twice last year. He put up great passing stats. That wasn't the reason that they lost the Notre Dame game or that they trailed Boston College heavily at halftime. It wasn't because of him. He played fine. But to the JT Daniels point, we've seen a lot more of JT Daniels than we have of those three quarterbacks I just mentioned. I mean, he started the entire year as a true freshman at USC, put up solid numbers that you'd expect from a true freshman. But then in his last 4 games last year, when he finally took over the starting job at Georgia, that offense really took off. So, to those that are pointing to a lack of resume from Daniels, I mean, he started a lot more, and we've seen a ton more of him than these other programs. So I don't buy that critique.
Talking with Britt Ciancia, pick6previews.com, the website again, spectacular preseason magazine, just $18 for people to get their hands on that. Head over to his site, support his work. He does a tremendous job. Also, a Heisman voter as well, a part of his resume now, which certainly, I don't guess you'll get to carry the moniker a Heisman Trophy winner to the grave, but hey, you get to carry a Heisman Trophy voter with you to the grave. That'll be a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I got that back in 2019, and I think I was the youngest in the country voter-wise, because usually it's traditionally, newspaper writers or beat writers that do it for 20, 30 years and then get that credential. So, the joke we were doing was that I was the youngest Heisman voter, but then I realized that these players, once they win, they get the Heisman vote as well. So I think Kyler Murray and Joe Burrow, I think they've got me beat on age. They got a couple years on me. So, it's quite the honor, the ultimate honor in terms of college football media. I don't take it lightly. I'm studying this thing, 12 months a year, 365 days a year. And, I break it down every Saturday, and I try and catch everything live. I have 4 screens going for 14 hours from noon till 2 a.m. every Saturday. And then Sunday I go watch it all again. So I try and see everything. And, I take a lot of pride in the Heisman vote.
Brett, that's a lot, man, but I know you dive in for a good purpose. And so I want to ask you this too, when we look at the landscape of college football since we last spoke, one of the things that's potentially changed to a degree is the conversations now between the Big 12 and maybe the Pac-12 on working out some sort of partnership. Last week we were wondering what those final 8 remaining teams in the Big 12 would do. Is this a move that would surprise you, if it comes to fruition, or do you think there's really some legs to something like this happening?
Well, I think first off, my personal opinion is I like the old regionality of the sport, the old traditions. I'd love to see the Big 12 just kind of stick together, maybe add a couple more Texas schools. But look, I'm not naive. I know this is not about actual football. It's about TV money and the big contracts in that regard. So when you look at it from their framework, the TV money, I don't see really what those remaining 8 teams add to the Pac-12. Maybe you get some Texas footprint there, but if you look at the TV numbers, Oklahoma and Texas really drove that league, the Big 12. They drove all the eyeballs, at least double, or I don't have the figures, but when you look at that as a pie chart, they were huge factors. So take them out. I'm not sure what, say, a Texas Tech or a Baylor or a Kansas really brings you from TV eyeballs perspective. So maybe it's a bigger total number, but you're then dividing it by 20 teams. It doesn't make sense to me. So we'll see. I mean, if anything, I thought the Pac-12 would have added maybe a couple of them, 2 or 4 to stay even, but I don't understand a super mega conference of 20 teams there. But, who knows at this point? It's the Wild West now.
It really is the Wild West. And my thought was that from the Pac-12's perspective, one of the things they've been encouraged to do in recent years is start their games at 9 o'clock their time to have some noon kickoffs and to get some Eastern eyeballs on their matchups. And I know that's not ideal. At least if you partner with the Big 12, you'd get some more realistic start time. You know what I mean? 11 o'clock starts that come on at noon on the East Coast, and you'd have that. I mean, so that I think there's got to be some advantage to the just the geography side of it for the Pac-12. That's the only reason I could see them doing it, because like you said, it can't be about the teams.
Right. And another angle to this is the recruiting footprint, and
oh yeah,
that's another thing I'm really fascinated about. And I've studied the regionality of recruiting, and recently, the past decade or last 5 years, the West Coast has really lost their stronghold on West Coast talent. It used to be that the best quarterbacks, the best players would from California would stay in California. They'd go to USC, UCLA, Stanford, or at worst, they'd just stay within the footprint and go to Oregon or Washington. But now you're seeing Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson. I think all three of those superpowers now have California quarterbacks battling for starting jobs. So they've lost their stronghold there. So I wonder if, establishing a presence in Texas could help. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know what would draw a Texas kid out west when you have all those great teams in Texas, and now the SEC barging in with A&M and the Longhorns. So I don't know. It's going to be nice. It's going to be fun to watch it unfold. I saw talks of Kansas to the Big Ten, but at this point, take everything with a grain of salt, because I also saw Clemson to the SEC, and I don't know. I don't know if that's a credible report. So let's just all, I'm excited to just talk about football again. Get this thing to late August and start talking X's and O's again, because it's been quite the drama this whole summer.
Yeah, Clemson gets on the practice field on Friday, and then we've got our first college football games coming up on Saturday, August the 28th. But really, it's that Labor Day weekend where, as you know, Brett, so many people are going to be locking in to watch some of these matchups. Is there a game outside of Clemson and Georgia? You mentioned, how potent that game potentially is with two top 5 teams facing off. And then you brought up that Alabama Florida State game. I think they were dubbing that like the matchup of the century or something. And that was awful. I mean, that was just awful from the standpoint of, Alabama pushing Florida State around in that game and Francois getting injured and all that. But is there another game that stands out for you? I mean, you thinking Alabama and Miami this year? Are you going to keep your eyes on Louisville, Ole Miss? I mean, what's the other marquee? Hey, I know you got 4 televisions and 14 hours of TV going at your place, but if you only have one TV and you had to watch something outside of Clemson and Georgia, where would Brett Ciancia perhaps be locking in week 1?
Yeah, for sure. Well, with the different TV time frames, Thursday night, I like Minnesota, Ohio State. That'll be huge to see a first glance at Ohio State's quarterback room. And I love that Thursday kickoff. It gets like an extra appetizer for the big opening Saturday coming. And even Friday night, a second round of appetizers with UNC and Virginia Tech, 2 quality ACC teams. And the winner might just represent the Coastal over there. So that might be a future opponent for Clemson. But talking Saturday in the noon slate, I like that Penn State at Wisconsin. These are 2 teams I'm very high on. I have Wisconsin winning the West Division, and Penn State I have second in the East, higher than most. I have them in the top 20. So I checked that one at noon. Yeah, I know Alabama, Miami, it kicks off at 3:30, but I have a feeling that'll be done by 4:30. It'll be a second quarter blowout. We'll see. So if that turns to a blowout, I'd like to see Indiana at Iowa at 3:30. Again, a team that many are high on, Indiana. I'm not so high on them this year. I think it was a special year for them and Tom Allen last year. I don't think they have the staying power. And then when you look at that night slate, yeah, obviously Clemson and Georgia is going to get all the attention, and it deserves it all. One that's on the back burner for me is LSU UCLA out in the Rose Bowl. LSU coming off of a historic transition year. I mean, I hope everyone got their jokes in on LSU last year, because this team is bouncing back quickly. It's a very loaded roster. And then UCLA was one of their better teams under Chip Kelly, finally taking that next step towards top 25 range and bowl eligibility. So, hey, a lot to like. I could name another 10 games. I'm going to have everything on. I'm going to be tuning in, and I'll get all my picks out there during the week for all the followers there on Twitter.
Well, and what do you think the impact of Miles Brennan and needing arm surgery? That news coming out earlier this week. I mean, what do you think that'll have, or what type of impact do you expect that to have on LSU? You mentioned you think they're going to have a pretty good season this year. I mean, that's a big loss for those guys, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I started writing the book and writing LSU's team preview, it was a 3-player quarterback battle between Max Johnson, Miles Brennan, and TJ Finley. And since that time, it looks completely different with TJ Finley transferring out to Auburn, and then now the fifth-year Miles Brennan getting injured, knocked out for most of the year. So it's down to Max Johnson. That's who I actually projected to win the battle anyway. So I think there's no drop-off there at the starting line, although you always want quarterback depth. You always want depth there. It's a physical conference, a physical schedule. So if something does happen to Max Johnson, then they're pretty thin there. But I like Johnson, what he brings in the RPO game. They're going to run him a bit more, kind of deceptive speed. But so depth-wise, it hurts. But starting line, I had him as the starter anyway. So we'll see what they do.
You know, Brett, in fairness, and I didn't prep you for this one. So, and I didn't prep you for any of them, but I didn't even say, if I was going to bring up South Carolina, sometimes I might say, hey, be prepared to talk about the Gamecocks. But I do have Gamecock listeners peeking over the fence and hanging out with us. And I know they're extremely excited about Shane Beamer and just the beginning of his tenure in Columbia. What's your reading on South Carolina from what you've been able to pick up for pick6previews.com and your preseason magazine on the Gamecocks?
Yeah, well, I think it was a necessary change for the program. I think that they were kind of stuck in the mud there, at least definitely offensively under Will Muschamp. So what Shane Beamer provides, and you saw him at Media Day, he was very charismatic. He kind of has that element to him. But offensively, I like what he brings. He wants to modernize that offense, bring in some Lincoln Riley schemes that he was a part of at Oklahoma. His offensive coordinator, Hire Satterfield, worked alongside Joe Brady, who, of course, was that mastermind behind the LSU Joe Burrow run. So I like what they've struck there offensively. It might take a few years to fully implement, but in the meantime, they have a heck of an offensive line, a nice running back tandem, one of the strongest running back pairs out there, really, with Harris and the five-star that was coming off an injury last year. And then defensively, some holes to patch up in the back seven, especially that secondary is going to be thin. I do like the firepower in the trenches there, a couple five-star guys like Pickens and Jordan Birch now at the edge. So a lot to like. There's certain areas I like there. All that said, it's a tough conference. I have them fifth in the SEC East, and that's ahead of Tennessee. A lot of people have Tennessee higher, but I sided with South Carolina this year.
Does anybody tell you how crazy your mind is to know all that information? Does anybody ever say that, Brett? You got it all, man.
Yeah, I know. It kind of freaks people out, I guess. But hey, that's what I do. And I was on a show out in Oregon, and they were just rattling off every Pac-12 team, and I was just kind of giving them my take and throwing some positional analysis. And they were like, "Dude, do you have like all 66 rosters in your head?" I was like, "Well, basically, yeah, at this point, after 8 months looking at it." But yeah, I love it, and that's just a small sample of what you have in the book there. I go really in depth on all 66 programs and talk program histories, coaching schemes, stuff that you might not find in the other preseason annuals. So
go get it right now. Pick6previews.com. It's the best $18 you're going to spend today. Trust me on that. Brett, always enjoy having you on the program on Wednesday afternoons, and looking forward to catching up with you again next week, my man. Hope you have a great week.
Yeah, thanks, Walton. You too. Appreciate it.
This guy. Wow. Yeah, I mean, like I was thinking,